Tec Sounds presents EduTrends.
Welcome to the EduTrends podcast and webcast brought to you by the Institute for the Future of Education of Tecnológico de Monterrey. I'm José Pepe Escamilla, Institute for the Future of Education Associate Director, and today's episode guest is Michelle Weise. Michelle is an education and workforce strategist and author of the book Long Life Learning. It's a pleasure to have you here, Michelle.
So great to be here with you, Pepe.
Great. So, but you recently published this book, Long Life Learning. Why is this book relevant today?
Yeah, I think it's, just like you, we've been to millions of conferences, right? And I think everyone sort of intuitively agrees with this idea of lifelong learning. The thing that kind of struck me as I was listening to people sort of prognosticate and predict around the future of work and the future of education was that even though we were all sort of agreeing that we all needed to be lifelong learners to keep up with this very uncertain world of work ahead, I wasn't actually seeing a lot of changes in terms of people's investment theses. So I wasn't seeing funders, think about what is that infrastructure going to look like? And even education providers, I think, were sort of thinking maybe continuing education or extension school might take care of that, or maybe MOOCs are the answer. But I wasn't seeing a lot of shifting and transformation happening. And so this book is really an attempt to kind of push us into action. And that really is just this idea of a longer life, the mental model of just extending our work lives a little bit more. And there are some experts on aging and longevity who are thinking that our lifespans could get substantially longer, and even, thinking that children born today could live to be 150 years old. But even if we just stretch it out a little bit, we're all staying in the workforce for far longer than we had anticipated. We're going through more job changes than we ever dreamed of. And as we think about technology or technological advancements and how they're, really transforming the nature of work, that number of job changes is only going to increase over time. And so it suddenly becomes very clear to us that our systems, our education systems, our workforce systems are not really set up to help us, in a 60, 80, 100-year work life. And for me, that was sort of the impetus for figuring out how we move towards change rather than just sort of, obsessing over the statistics and the millions of jobs that we would lose to automation. All of that stuff's was kind of fearful sounding or just paralyzing. And this idea of a longer work life really helps us kind of jumpstart into action and think, oh my goodness, we need to start building now, because all of us are going to have to depend on a better lifelong learning ecosystem.
Yes, great idea. The book is, in fact, very important in these times. So, with the extension of a lifespan and changes in the workforce due to Industry 4.0, or the automation, etc., we need to change. You say we need to change a lot of things in our educational system. I would say formal, like universities, but also education for work or lifelong learning. What will be the main changes that you foresee that we have to start right now to be able to be prepared for these changes?
Yeah, I think it's helpful, like you just did, to divide up sort of the formal education sphere and then also just kind of continuous returns to learning over that longer work life. Because from, as we think about pre-K through all the way through post-secondary education and tertiary education, our systems have kind of looked the same for centuries, right? And we divide up our disciplines into specific silos or departments. And we always think about, teaching our learners to solve a problem in this particular discipline. And I think we really have to get to the business of truly thinking about interdisciplinary learning, but really doing it at scale and system-wide across a particular school or a school district or a university system. I think people tend to integrate things like problem-based learning at a course level. Someone's going to do their senior thesis and their final capstone project, and it's going to be that thing that is really, problem-based. But as we think about that uncertain world of work ahead, we can't fully anticipate every single skill we need to build in order to meet the challenges ahead. What we do know is it's going to be a real mix and hybrid nature of human and technical skills. We have to bring our sort of uniquely human perspective, our way of thinking about judgment, exercising judgment, and having emotional intelligence and empathy and ways of thinking about systems versus, just very narrow problems. That's going to really help us coordinate with machines, with robots, with computers. But we also need a really healthy mix of technical skills. And while we can't necessarily identify every single skill we need to be successful in the future, we do know that we really need to be the best problem solvers in the world. And that means being able to encounter a highly ambiguous circumstance, synthesize information, evaluate the context, and be able to begin making data-driven decisions, right? And integrating qualitative research, all these different kinds of skills that we know we are trying to build in our learners in K-12 or post-secondary education, college, university. We know those are the skills we're trying to imbue in our learners, but we haven't actually started really breaking down the structures of our systems to really cultivate that real world problem-based learning at scale, right? And so one of the examples I think of that's happening right now in the world is in the UK, there's an innovator named Carl Gombrecht who's building the London Interdisciplinary School. And he's really trying to get at this idea of real world problem solving. And so what he's doing is instead of setting up 45 different departments with 45 different faculty members of this new university, he's having 9 faculty members teach 45 different disciplines. And so that's the way that you kind of demonstrate to your current learners, right? This is the way we solve problems. It's not just within this bounded area, it's across disciplines, right? And this is how we use principles across and, seemingly unrelated domains and use them here. So there's that kind of like dramatic transformation that really needs to occur at our formal education level. But then as we think about sometimes we're just going to need to skill up a tiny bit when you're going to need like 1 competency or 4 competencies or 11 competencies to stay competitive in our job. We're not going to necessarily want to go back and get yet another degree, right? We're going to want sort of a just-in-time solution that is targeted and precise and also fits in with our very busy lives so that we can, again, remain relevant in that uncertain workforce. So I think that's the kind of mix we're going to have is not only do we have to rethink our existing infrastructure and our systems, at the elementary, secondary, post-secondary levels, but we also have to start thinking about unbundling and really offering specific, precise, targeted learning experiences that can help people make progress in their lives.
Okay, great. Very interesting. And it also reminds me of our Tech 21 educational model in Tec de Monterrey that is challenge-based.
Yes.
You were here, I think, before we launched the first full generation. We started in August 2019, where students spend around 50% of the time solving challenges, real-world challenges with real clients, people from the business, government, industry, the non-governmental organizations.
Yeah.
And the reality is not divided in silos. Those challenges are co-developed with faculty from these 2 academic departments, 2 disciplines, no?
Yeah.
Because the reality is like that. And what we want is to develop these so-called soft skills that are so important in the future to stay relevant, no matter what are the new the new jobs or the jobs of the future, those things that make us human are and that allow us to interact with machines are very important. And the only way to develop them is in more real world situations than in class abstract disciplinary teaching. Also, I think this is the kind of things that we need, but it's very difficult for universities to make that kind of change. I think so. I wonder if you have some ideas of how can we approach this in a more systemic way to be able to achieve this kind of change in universities.
Yeah, you're completely right. It all comes down to incentives, right? And I think when you think about the structure of a university setting in particular, and the way that adjunct professors or full-time professors keep their jobs and stay successful in their jobs, they're thinking about what are the advancement, the tenure, the promotion processes that exist that make my lifestyle sustainable, right? It's inevitable. Like, that's what we think about. We're incentivized by these different processes that exist. And as just one example, in most universities, it doesn't pay to teach really well, right? It's about research, or it doesn't pay to actually collaborate closely with a colleague from a totally different department, right? You don't earn extra bonus points by, co-teaching courses. In fact, that's kind of looked down upon or stigmatized, right? Because you're not doing that work on your own. And so we really have to kind of step back as, if we're in a university system, and look at what are the incentive structures we have created that are maybe leading to this behavior or this particular resistance to change, or like this inertia. Usually it comes down to what are the incentives that are in place that are driving that behavior. And I think if we can kind of start rethinking some of those models, it really will potentially catalyze a change in behavior. But for the moment, it's really hard to suggest to someone to do something so different from what has been working just fine for them, right? Why would they completely rethink their curriculum when people are paying, or people are still coming and attending these classes? Why would I go through that dramatic change? But I think as we think about, particularly, as you think of Tec de Monterrey or Tec Milenio, right? Like, as you think about these different really innovative solutions out there, the sad part is that you guys are outliers, right? You guys are anomalies in the system, where you are really thinking very deliberately about how do we expand the amount of time people are working on real world problems. And I think we can each think of maybe 10, 20 different examples in the world of really amazing schools doing this kind of work. But it shouldn't be the case that we can name all of them, right? It should be happening everywhere. Everyone should be doing this across the entire learning experience. But instead, we're always kind of isolating, there's this really great school, in San Diego that does this really well, right? Or there's this really interesting school in Singapore that does this. That shouldn't be the case. It should be across the globe, right? Just happening everywhere. I shouldn't be able to mention that London Interdisciplinary School as something special, right? And that's one of the challenges we have.
Yeah. So I agree with you that the incentives are not the right ones, that we need. But I also believe it will be difficult to change that, because the way universities are constructed, with all the bodies of decision, the Senate, etc., are done to maintain status quo. So change is difficult, and we have to find out ways of introducing change, maybe in some areas of the university, maybe creating a new school that has a different way of working, or different ways of achieving tenure that are not the regular ones based on on research, for instance. Well, I think it's still a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
I'm not that optimistic, but we have to work on that.
Yeah. It's going to be very slow. And unfortunately, for most universities, it's not going to be a real thing that they're going to deliberately strategize around until maybe the university or college is in financial duress, right? Once they're stressed financially, then they might be willing to entertain something pretty novel and distinct and a way of differentiating themselves from their competitors. But I think both the universities and the companies that are really going to thrive in the future are going to maybe try to do some parallel efforts, even if it's maybe not potentially possible to do this within our existing system or structure. Maybe we can think about an incubation zone, right? A different kind of unit that might be able to test the bounds of what is possible to change, and and where you have really early adopters who don't need to be convinced of why this is necessary, right? It's this kind of incubation zone or this autonomous growth unit where you can really start to play around and experiment with these models. I mean, this is what you guys do so well, is that you do separate your models, and you're testing out kind of in small ways within the existing model ways to push the bounds. But I think you really do have to do both at once, because it's this idea of, jumping to your next S curve, right? It used to be possible that as your business model is declining, you can figure out something new for the future. But now you have to do both at the same time, right? You have to kind of build the thing that's in the sustaining trajectory and build the thing that might be potentially disruptive at the same time. And that's really hard. That's really, really hard for even the most forward-leaning institutions.
And that's a good example of how you can change from an internal decision or an external decision. Like we did change during the pandemic very fast because we were forced to do that, and one of those forces could be financial difficulties. And I'm not sure what you think that could be part of the future. I think one of the reasons could be that there's disruption from other stakeholders. What's in your mind when you say that?
Yeah, so thinking about a couple of different trends. One is, so obviously I'm coming at it from a US perspective, but within the US, we really peaked back in 2013 with the number of degree granting institutions we have. So at one point, we had over 4,700 colleges and universities. Just over these last 8 or 9 years, that has really kind of actually contracted in a substantial way. So when I wrote the book, even just a couple of years ago, the number was down to fewer than 4,300 institutions. So already we had seen the contraction of about 400 plus universities either merging, going bankrupt, right, folding. And then the pandemic just adds a whole other layer of stress. So we know that enrollments are falling. We know that this younger generation of learners isn't necessarily assuming that they're going to go to college. And then what's even more worrisome is that we know in the mid 2030s, there's going to actually be this kind of huge cliff in terms of the number of enrollments who would traditionally be in that kind of 18 to 24-year-old category, your traditional college goers. It's going to severely contract to the point where we are going to see kind of a massive shift in our universities and colleges who are not prepared for that enrollment decline. There's also really interesting and not fully understandable yet things that are happening in the shadow sector of education. So as you think about the MOOCs that exist and these different kinds of combinations of, 2U and edX, right? And these different groups that are working in this sort of micro-credential space or this, non-formal education or non-accredited work, there's really interesting possibilities where those kinds of players in the field are going to start putting enormous pressure on these colleges and universities, who are suddenly going to realize, oh, if our 18 to 24-year-old population is declining, we better start thinking about working learners, right? People who are just trying to upskill and reskill in the workforce, and they're going to try to shift very dramatically to serving adult learners. Meanwhile, this group of stakeholders has been doing this entire time and testing and trying things out with people like you and me, right? And so that's going to really also put a tremendous amount of pressure on our existing kind of status quo of how we think about education or workforce training.
Mm-hmm. So very interesting, the situation that you describe in the US. I don't think is exactly the same in other places, but we see some flavors of that depending on countries where education is mainly public or subsidized, etc. But I believe it's we see some part of this reality that you see in the US in other places. In particular, I want to focus on the non-accredited work or micro-credentials or lifelong learning after the degree. And I see that there are some areas of disruption that are very clear, particularly in digital skills, no? Like a programmer, a data science, cybersecurity, etc., where we see that there are some providers that are offering things that are as demanded as maybe or more sometimes than a degree, no? And in the universities, we offer degrees, and we have what we call continuing education. And in general, continuing education is like a second class, I would say, thing compared to four-degree education that we offer, because maybe we obtain some funding there to subsidize other things that we do in the university. In other cases, it's for social reasons also, but in general, it's not at the same level, no? So in the future, I believe that universities that take seriously this part of the university, the continuing education, and boost it to become more a lifelong learning. Some universities are calling this the 60-year curriculum, no? So that we believe that the university has to be the partner for the student or alumni for the rest of their lives, no?
Yep.
And creating these pathways for them to continue development with the university or with other areas, no? But how we can become partners for the rest of their life, for formative partners. What do you think about this, Michelle?
Yeah. When you start to kind of look closely at, the schools that are, thinking rightly so about something like a 60-year curriculum, what I'm not yet fully seeing is a real reimagination of curricular development for that lifelong learner. I think we keep thinking, well, okay, if we need to adjust and serve working learners, let's offer a subscription model, or let's chunk up this particular degree program or certificate into smaller bite-sized pieces so that people can consume this more easily. But they're not fully reimagining what that learning experience looks like, right? And so one of the challenges that we've identified, right, is those human skills are going to be so incredibly important to be successful in this, potential robot machine learning future that we're facing, right? And we know that, but how do you actually build and advance and keep progressing in your sophistication of your human skills, right? How do you continue to build empathy for your customer or your client, right? How do you think about systems thinking? How are we going to actually build in those human skills into something that fits into the busy lives of a person who's working full time, right? What does that learning experience look like? It can't just be a shorter lecture, right, that we currently give in our current model. We can't just kind of take one syllabus and cut it into smaller pieces and think that that's going to be maybe a stackable credential for someone. There has to be not only kind of a real meaningful signal to an employer that this learning experience is valuable, but it's also got to entertain and engage us as learners, right? Because doing more education at the same time that we're managing work, our family lives, taking care of our, aging parents or our kids or whatever the situation may be, it has to keep us engaged and wanting to continue to learn, because learning is hard work, right? When we're asking someone to come back to school, that's a huge proposition for someone who's working multiple part-time jobs or full-time jobs. It has to feel and look different. And that's what we're seeing, right, in these other players that are out there in the for-profit, venture-backed world that are maybe doing these boot camps in really fascinating ways, or thinking about that digital experience, in a mobile environment or even just a cellular environment to keep a learner persisting. That's something I think that we're not yet fully seeing at an institutional level as they think about things like a 60-year curriculum. I think they're kind of realizing the importance of stretching, how we engage with learners and how we keep in contact with our alumni and how we maybe keep them coming back. What we haven't fully, I think, spent enough time on is, okay, once they've decided to come back, how am I going to prove to them that this is something truly valuable in the market and also something that will help them make true progress in their work lives? I think that's a real kind of, that's the next step.
Yes. I was taking notes. So to summarize somehow what you said is one of the things that we need to do for this 60-year curriculum to work is to put the student at the center and understand the needs of a student that is very different, because our students that work, have a life, a family life, etc.
Yeah,
you have to keep them engaged. No, it's the short lecture will not make the work, but also that the value proposition of the university is such that what they will obtain here is it's something that will advance their careers. No, so from we're talking a 60-year curriculum from the degree to the job, from job to job, and from career to career, no, up to retirement.
yeah.
So there are different kinds of changes and things that we have to do and demonstrate that we will be able in universities to become this partner for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
Of learning.
Yeah, it's you put it perfectly, thinking, that the answer here is to be truly learner-centered. And I think one of the things, that came out as I was doing a lot of the research for this book is that idea of meeting learners where they are is a beautiful kind of turn of phrase. People like to say, that they're really intent on meeting learners where they are. But when you actually, again, take that language and then look at what they're providing for the learners, it isn't actually truly meeting learners where they are. Because with you, me, with anyone else who's currently in the workforce, there's so many things we bring to the table that extend far beyond our formal credential, whatever that credential may be, right? There's so much experience we've gained along the way, but there's no way to actually necessarily put value or put words to it, right? I could have learned so many of these human skills taking care of a grandparent who had Alzheimer's, right? Or I could have just gained a lot of work experience where I'm accumulating these kind of hidden credentials along the way, if I am engaging in a learning experience that truly meets me where I am, it will be able to say, listen, I know you've done these things, and I know that you actually bring these specific hidden competencies to the table, because I value these different experiences that you've had and the ways in which you've exercised those competencies. But we don't have ways really kind of to dynamically recognize those kinds of skills we bring to the table. And that's really challenging, right? We have things like prior learning assessments, but they don't work in this dynamic format where anyone, even someone who maybe doesn't have a degree, can prove that they have real knowledge, skills, and abilities, right? And that's, I think, one of the things we really have to start working on from a science of learning perspective is how do we begin to really start to codify and value and benchmark these kinds of workforce readiness skills to give people a better chance.
Nice. So it's a real lots of challenges, but one challenge is that is very important, and also in a university setting is complicated because of the emphasis that we have in higher ed more than lifelong learning.
Yes.
I believe that we need also to do more research and experimentation around that, and the universities could be a good place to do that with skills of researchers and people that we have. And maybe some of these incentives will be when, as you say, this tipping point on the number of enrollments on higher ed that universities, we have seen that in universities in other countries like in Singapore, where enrollments for degree education is decreasing. Universities have maintained their budget as they are willing to grow their offering in lifelong learning. Also, we are seeing these shifts in other parts of the world, and I hope that we will see these changes also in the future in other parts of the world. One last question, or I don't know if that's a question or discussion, is around this conversation that we have had. Is you have higher ed and you have lifelong learning, but there's like no real interaction on this. And I believe that in the future we could see also more continuum on this, no, on higher ed and lifelong learning, on returning to the university for degree or non-degree education. I'm not sure. So what is your view on this? You do believe that we will still have a degree in something and then you continue doing lifelong learning experiences, or do you see a revolution or a change in the future on the way higher education and lifelong learning interact more in a cyclic way?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely do think there will always be value in a degree. That's not going to just like somehow disappear and become worthless. I do think you're right that it isn't just going to be, 4 years and then lifelong learning. It's not that simple, especially given the numbers of working adults who are trying to complete their degrees or trying to pursue some sort of more advanced education. I do think there will be a turn toward thinking through how do we truly create stackable credentials that mean something, right? So you see different kinds of schools experimenting with this, where in one particular example at BYU Pathway, they try to create a job certificate first, with the idea that once someone is financially set in terms of not having to feel like they're in a constant hustle to survive, then they can maybe entertain the idea of continuing that and building from that certificate into a larger degree program. And they've seen this actually bear out through the data where, someone can actually become a diesel mechanic through a quick program, and then suddenly they're making $80,000 a year. And that is that maybe meets that threshold for family sustaining wages. And then they start to think, oh my gosh, this really paid off, right? Education really paid off. And they're seeing the persistence rates kind of increase in terms of people who are saying, okay, that's step one. Now I want more, right? I know that if I get this degree, it's going to even, be more transformative in my life. So I think those are the kinds of pieces that, rather than thinking about taking a specific degree program and kind of chunking it up into small pieces, it's going to be, okay, if I want to truly meet learners where they are, I need to kind of identify the pain points that they're grappling with. And for some of them, it may be financial, but some of them, it may just be, very specific wraparound support services that are needed. They need real kind of childcare access or, mental health supports or whatever the thing may be that's preventing them from making progress. I think that's the piece that I think universities are going to get better at when they really start trying to break down in real concrete steps. What do we mean when we say that we're going to meet learners where they are, right? What does that truly, turn into in terms of how we change our behavior? Maybe it means that we start offering some of these things that we always offered on campus online, right? That's a simple kind of transformation. But sometimes it's about, nope, I need to actually feed these people dinner and watch their children while they carve out 2 hours to be able to continue moving forward, right? It's very kind of, it depends on who your adult learner is, but I think we're going to get better at those pieces of the equation as well.
Oh, very, very interesting answer, Michelle. Thanks for your thoughts that make us think on a very different way, a disruptive way of how higher education should be rethinking itself. And in general, the workforce training with this book around long life learning that you have written. Thanks again, Michelle, for your time and for sharing with us your views on lifelong learning and skills and jobs of the future.
Thanks so much for having me.
It would surely be of great value for the Institute for the Future of Education audience, and I hope we can have you here soon.
Sounds great. Would love to.
Thanks. For more information, visit observatory.tech.mx/EduTrends podcast and ife.tech.mx. A special thanks to Tecnológico de Monterrey, the Institute for the Future of Education, and the Tec Sounds team. Tec Sounds producer, Miguel Mejia. EduTrends producers, Esteban Venegas and Cristian Guijosa. Stay tuned and play Tec Sounds in your favorite podcast app for other great shows and content.